Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really hard look at something that's probably sitting in your pocket, on your desk, or, maybe even in your hand right this very second. We are pulling back the curtain on the unseen dangers inside our everyday electronics. It's a story about technology for sure, but it's really a story about environmental health, hidden hazards, and what actually happens to the things we think we've simply just thrown away. Okay, let's dive into this. Right now, I want you to just take a quick glance at the device you might be holding. Looks pretty sleek, right? Some glass, maybe a bit of aluminum or plastic. But if we were to literally crack it open and look past the microchips and the battery, what materials actually make that incredible piece of technology function? What elements are out there making those split-second connections possible? Well, the answer is honestly a lot darker than you might expect. Lead, mercury, and cadmium. Now, these aren't just some obscure elements you had to memorize on the periodic table back in high school chemistry. They're very real, very present components living inside our everyday home electronics. So the crucial point is, these are hidden poisons. And hey, as long as they're safely encased inside your working phone, they do their job just fine. But the exact moment that phone becomes trash, the stakes become incredibly high. Because here is the immediate environmental threat we're facing. When these toxic devices are simply tossed in the regular trash, they inevitably end up in local landfills. And landfills, they aren't perfectly sealed magic vaults. Over time, as it rains and as those materials break down, those heavy metals, that lead, mercury, and cadmium, they literally leach right into the soil. That directly leads to severe groundwater contamination, quietly poisoning the very water systems that local communities rely on to survive. Okay, let's zoom out to the macro level for a second to really grasp the scale of this problem. Look at this staggering number, 42,000 tons. And get this, that isn't a global statistic. That is the amount of electronic waste generated in just one single country, Nepal, in the year 2023 alone. In a landlocked nation already facing complex infrastructure challenges, 42,000 tons of toxic e-waste is a monumental, rapidly growing crisis. To put that into perspective, I want you to imagine 7,000 elephants, but made entirely out of hazardous, toxic materials. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what 42,000 tons looks like. Without scientific handling and proper dedicated facilities, these massive, elephant-sized volumes of waste are effectively just ending up dumped in our rivers and buried in our soil. And there's a shockingly stark imbalance here when you look at how this massive amount of waste is currently being handled. Check out this chart. Right now, a whopping 95% of e-waste processing in the region is handled by the informal sector. Only a tiny 5% sliver makes it to formal regulated recycling facilities. That massive imbalance right there, that is the root of the entire crisis. But what does informal sector actually mean in the real world? Well, simply put, it's unregulated waste processing. In practice, this often means extremely hazardous open-air burning. You have workers, frequently without any protective gear whatsoever, literally burning the plastic casings off wires just to get to the valuable copper inside. This releases highly toxic fumes straight into the air, creating a massive public health and environmental crisis for all the surrounding communities. It's just a really dangerous, desperate way to recover materials. But here is where we pivot, and it's an important one. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this concept completely shifts our perspective. Electronic waste isn't just trash. It's an urban mine. This is the core philosophy that changes the whole shebang. We have to stop looking at a busted laptop as garbage and start looking at it as an incredibly dense source of highly valuable, unrefined resources. Just think about the sheer economic value locked inside all this discarded tech. Get this. 1 ton of smartphone printed circuit boards, the little green motherboards inside your phone, contains up to 100 times more gold than a ton of actual gold ore pulled straight from the earth. That is absolutely wild. By recovering these precious metals locally from our e-waste, we drastically reduce the need for destructive traditional mining, while at the same time keeping those toxins out of the environment. Doko Recyclers, the formal alternative. So how does Nepal's first dedicated e-waste facility actually work? Well, they step in to provide a really scientific, regulated bridge from waste to value. Let's walk through it together. It's a meticulous process designed for maximum material recovery and safe hazardous waste mitigation. Step 1 is secure collection, simply getting it out of those local landfills. Step 2 is honestly fascinating, manual dismantling.
Rather than just tossing everything into a giant, messy shredder, trained teams carefully take the devices apart by hand to actually preserve the components. And then step 3 is hazardous extraction, making absolutely sure those hidden poisons we talked about, the lead, mercury, and cadmium, are isolated and managed through formal legal channels so they never ever touch the groundwater.
Now, if you are running a business, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I can't just hand over my old company servers. They're full of sensitive data. And you're right. Environmental responsibility absolutely has to meet data security. That is exactly why certified data destruction is provided at Doko. This ensures that recycling your old hard drives doesn't accidentally turn into a massive cybersecurity liability or a data breach. It isn't just about recycling the physical hardware. It is 100% about protecting corporate reputations too. But true sustainability isn't just about destroying things and melting them down. The most sustainable device out there is the one that's already made. That's why their hierarchy starts with a refurbishment-first strategy. Before breaking tech down for parts, the ultimate goal is to give it a second life. A really wonderful example of this is Project RRR, Recover, Refurbish, and Reuse, where 206 fully refurbished devices were recently distributed to under-resourced rural classrooms. It is actively closing the digital divide by reusing tech before we even think about recycling it. Looking ahead, if we want to truly solve this crisis, the rules of the game have to change. And this is where extended producer responsibility, or EPR, comes into play. Basically, these are regulations requiring the manufacturers, the massive companies making the phones and laptops, to take ownership of the entire life cycle of their products, right down to the recycling stage. Formal facilities are getting ready right now to partner with these major brands to build transparent, fully compliant take-back systems. And the technology to handle this massive influx of tech, it's evolving so rapidly. We're looking at the exciting frontier of e-waste innovation right now. The industry is actively moving toward AI-driven sorting systems for incredible accuracy. Furthermore, with the massive rise of electric vehicles and e-cooking, lithium-ion battery recycling is no longer some distant future problem. It's right here. Facilities are prioritizing the highly specialized handling of what's called black mass, which is that incredibly valuable mix of cobalt and lithium hiding inside those batteries. Ultimately, this whole explainer boils down to a core philosophy shift that we all really need to embrace. We absolutely must transition from waste management to resource management. We have to finally recognize a very simple truth. There is literally no such thing as throwing something away. Away doesn't exist. It's just a landfill, a river, or a hazardous burn pit somewhere else. Everything goes somewhere. Let's move to and see how this builds when we bring it a little closer to home. Think about your workplace for a second, or, that one junk drawer in your kitchen. Come on, we all have one. Does your office have an e-waste corner just gathering dust? A random pile of old keyboards, cracked monitors, and phones from like 3 upgrades ago? See, a lot of people think, well, it's totally safe if it's just sitting quietly in my storeroom. That is a complete myth. Actually, scratch that. It's worse than a myth. The fact is, hoarded electronics are a massive fire hazard, especially when dealing with older, swelling batteries. They're a lingering, silent data breach risk, and most importantly, they are a lost resource. Every single year that an old laptop just sits idle in a dark closet, its upcycle potential drops. You are literally letting an urban mine gather dust. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to reflect on. What is the true cost of throwing away your technology? It's definitely not just the price tag of your next new phone. The real cost is measured in contaminated groundwater, in failing public health, and in completely lost valuable resources. It's time we rethink our everyday habits, fully embrace the circular economy, and recognize that we all have a very direct role in protecting our environment, one device at a time. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I truly hope it completely changes the way you look at the tech in your hands today.